Think about this comparison for a moment and let it really sink in. We live in the most prosperous, comfortable, technologically advanced civilization in human history. Yet we have record levels of mental illness, social isolation, and existential despair. Medieval people lived in wooden huts, worked physically demanding jobs, and faced constant threats from disease, war, and famine. Yet they were psychologically healthier than we are. How is that possible? The answer is community interdependence. Medieval people woke up every morning knowing that their neighbors needed them and that they needed their neighbors. They had unbreakable social bonds that gave their lives meaning and security that no amount of modern technology can provide. But wait, because it gets even more incredible. Family structures were designed for survival in harsh conditions, but they were also remarkably sophisticated social and economic organizations that put modern corporations to shame. Multiple generations lived together not just for emotional reasons, but for practical ones that created incredibly efficient household systems. But here's the part that'll absolutely amaze you and make you reconsider everything about modern family life. Grandparents provided childcare and wisdom. Parents provided labor and leadership. Children contributed work appropriate to their age, and everyone had a role that was essential to the family's survival. These extended family systems were like small corporations where everyone had specific responsibilities and everyone's work contributed to the common good. Children learned by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, creating incredibly effective apprenticeship systems within families. And here's the revolutionary discovery that modern business experts are just making. These medieval family systems were more efficient, more sustainable, and more psychologically healthy than our modern nuclear family structure. They had built-in childcare, elder care, education systems, and economic support that eliminated most of the stress and isolation that modern families struggle with. When a parent got sick, there were other adults to take over their responsibilities. When children needed to learn skills, there were multiple teachers available. When elderly people needed care, the entire family system supported them while still benefiting from their wisdom and experience. It was a perfect social safety net that we've completely abandoned in favor of individualism, and we're paying the price with broken families, lonely elderly people, and overwhelmed parents. But here's the part that's going to absolutely shock you and completely revolutionize how you think about childhood development. Medieval children weren't just miniature adults as everyone thinks, and this myth is one of the most damaging misconceptions about medieval life. They had their own culture, games, and social structures that were specifically designed for their developmental needs, and it was more sophisticated than our modern education system. Medieval people understood child development and created age-appropriate activities and responsibilities. Children learned through play, just like today, but their play was designed to teach survival skills and social cooperation in ways that our modern education system completely fails to achieve. And here's where it gets absolutely fascinating, and will make you question everything about modern childhood. Medieval toys were often miniature versions of adult tools. Toy swords, dolls with complete wardrobes, miniature farming implements, small looms for learning weaving. These weren't just entertainment. They were sophisticated educational tools that prepared children for adult responsibilities while still allowing them to be children. But here's the incredible part that child development experts are just rediscovering. This type of play-based learning was more effective at teaching practical skills than our modern classroom-based education system. Medieval children learned by doing, by playing, by gradually taking on real responsibilities that mattered to their families and communities. Compare that to modern children who spend most of their time in artificial learning environments, disconnected from real work and real purpose. Medieval children knew that their play was preparing them for meaningful adult roles that their community valued. Modern children often struggle to see the point of their education because it's so disconnected from real life and real purpose. Medieval children grew up with confidence and competence because they were gradually integrated into adult society through meaningful work and responsibility. Modern children often reach adulthood feeling unprepared and purposeless because they've been isolated from adult society and meaningful work for their entire childhood. Family structures were designed for survival in harsh conditions, but they were also remarkably sophisticated social and economic organizations. Multiple generations lived together not just for emotional reasons but for practical ones that created incredibly efficient household systems. Grandparents provided childcare and wisdom. Parents provided labor and leadership. Children contributed work appropriate to their age. And everyone had a role that was essential to the family's survival. But here's the part that'll absolutely amaze you. These extended family systems were like small corporations where everyone had specific responsibilities, and everyone's work contributed to the common good. Children learned by watching and gradually taking on more responsibility, creating incredibly effective apprenticeship systems within families. But here's something that'll blow your mind and completely destroy the children as miniature adults myth. Medieval children weren't just miniature adults as everyone thinks. They had their own culture, games, and social structures that were specifically designed for their developmental needs. Medieval people understood child development and created age-appropriate activities and responsibilities. Children learned through play, just like today, but their play was designed to teach survival skills and social cooperation. And here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Medieval toys were often miniature versions of adult tools: toy swords, dolls with complete wardrobes, miniature farming implements, small looms for learning weaving. These weren't just entertainment. They were sophisticated educational tools that prepared children for adult responsibilities while still allowing them to be children. But here's the incredible part that child development experts are just rediscovering. This type of play-based learning was more effective at teaching practical skills than our modern classroom-based education system. Now here's something that's going to completely change how you think about time and will blow your mind. Medieval people had a completely different relationship with time that was actually more natural and less stressful than our modern time. Obsession. They didn't think in terms of precise schedules, but in terms of natural rhythms and seasonal cycles. Work was organized around daylight, seasons, and weather patterns. This created a more flexible but also more sustainable daily routine. Medieval time was measured by tasks completed rather than hours passed. And here's the revolutionary part. You didn't work for 8 hours. You worked until the cows were milked, the fields were plowed, or the bread was baked. This task-oriented approach to time created more satisfaction and less stress than our clock-watching culture. The most incredible discovery? Modern productivity experts are now recommending this exact approach to combat burnout and increase job satisfaction. But wait, there's more that'll absolutely shock you. Community celebrations were incredibly important because they provided rare opportunities for joy and social bonding that went beyond daily survival. Harvest festivals, religious holidays, and wedding celebrations gave people something to look forward to during difficult times. These weren't just parties. They were essential psychological and social infrastructure that kept communities strong. And here's the mind-blowing part that changes everything. These celebrations were also economic events where debts were settled, marriages were arranged, business deals were made, and news was shared. A single festival might serve as a bank, dating service, news network, and entertainment center all rolled into one. Think about that for a moment. They had integrated social media, banking, and entertainment into community events that actually brought people together instead of isolating them behind screens. Now, prepare to have your mind completely blown by this next revelation. The medieval understanding of education was much broader and more practical than our modern system. While formal literacy was limited, people learned through apprenticeships, storytelling, and hands-on experience that created incredibly knowledgeable and skilled individuals. A master craftsman might not be able to read, but their knowledge of their trade was encyclopedic and included chemistry, physics, and engineering principles. But here's the absolutely incredible part. Medieval education was based on the idea that knowledge should be immediately useful and applicable to daily life. Abstract learning was considered less valuable than practical skills that contributed to survival and community well-being. And here's something that'll absolutely amaze you and put our modern environmental movement to shame. Medieval people were incredibly resourceful in ways that would amaze modern environmentalists and efficiency experts. They had to make everything last as long as possible and find uses for things we'd throw away without thinking. Nothing was wasted. Even worn-out clothing was recycled into rags, bandages, or stuffing for pillows. They lived the ultimate sustainable lifestyle out of necessity. This resourcefulness extended to every aspect of life, and here's the part that'll leave you speechless. Broken pottery became garden drainage. Worn-out shoes became leather patches. Old rope became oakum for caulking boats. Medieval people could look at any object and see 5 different ways to use it. Modern recycling experts are studying medieval waste management techniques to improve our own sustainability practices. But here's what's really shocking about medieval work life and will completely change your perspective. Medieval people had more leisure time than most modern workers, especially during winter months. Once their essential tasks were complete, they had time for storytelling, music, games, and socializing. The idea that they worked constantly from dawn to dusk is completely wrong. Medieval work was seasonal and task-oriented, and here's the revolutionary part. During planting and harvest, everyone worked incredibly hard for long hours. But during winter, there was much less work to do, so people focused on crafts, socializing, and cultural activities. This natural rhythm provided built-in rest periods that our modern economy lacks. The most shocking revelation? They had better work-life balance than we do, despite living 800 years ago. Now, get ready for this bombshell that'll destroy everything Hollywood taught you about medieval women. Medieval women had more power and influence than Hollywood portrays, though it was expressed differently than modern women's rights. While they faced restrictions, many women ran businesses, owned property, and held significant political influence behind the scenes. Female merchants, craftswomen, and even warriors were more common than most people realize. But here's the absolutely incredible part that historians are just discovering. Medieval women often managed the household economy, which was the foundation of the entire social system. They controlled budgets, managed workers, planned for seasonal needs, and made decisions that affected the welfare of extended families and sometimes entire communities. Some medieval women had more economic power than most modern CEOs, but they exercised it within the domestic sphere. And finally, here's something that'll blow your mind about medieval professional life. The guild system was like medieval LinkedIn, but actually effective and supportive in ways modern professional organizations can only dream of. Guilds provided quality control, training, social support, and career advancement that was remarkably sophisticated. They weren't just about business. They were comprehensive social organizations that took care of members' families, provided education, maintained professional standards, and even offered insurance and retirement benefits. Guild membership was like having a professional family that lasted your entire career. And here's the incredible part. If you became disabled, the guild would support you. If you died, the guild would take care of your widow and children. If you needed training, the guild would provide it. If you needed work, the guild would help you find it. Modern labor unions and professional associations are still trying to recreate the comprehensive support system that medieval guilds provided. Medieval guilds also maintained incredibly high-quality standards that ensured customers got good value for their money. But here's the most amazing part. Guild products came with guarantees that were enforced by the entire organization. A guild member who produced shoddy work would be disciplined by their peers and could lose their membership. They had consumer protection that was more effective than many modern systems. Buckle up, because what I'm about to show you will completely transform your understanding of human resilience and make you question everything about our modern relationship with nature. Life in medieval times was completely controlled by the seasons in ways that modern people can barely imagine. But medieval people didn't just survive these seasonal changes. They mastered them with sophisticated techniques that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would defeat most modern people. Each season brought its own challenges, opportunities, and essential tasks that couldn't be delayed or ignored. But here's the part that'll absolutely blow your mind. Medieval people approached these seasonal changes with incredible knowledge, planning, and community cooperation that created remarkably resilient societies. They had backup plans for their backup plans, and contingency strategies that modern disaster preparedness experts are studying and trying to implement. Spring was a time of desperate hope, mixed with calculated planning and incredibly sophisticated agricultural science. And here's where it gets absolutely incredible. After months of surviving on stored food, people would anxiously watch for the first signs of new growth. But this wasn't passive waiting. It was active preparation based on centuries of accumulated knowledge. The success or failure of spring planting would determine whether the family would eat well or struggle in the coming year. But here's the mind-blowing part. They had weather prediction methods that were more accurate than some modern forecasting techniques. Medieval farmers were incredibly sophisticated in their understanding of soil, weather patterns, and plant biology that puts many modern farmers to shame. And this is going to shock you. They knew exactly when to plant different crops based on subtle environmental cues that modern farmers might miss completely. They could read the landscape like a book, understanding which areas would drain well, which would retain moisture, and which would be protected from frost. But here's the absolutely incredible part. They could predict the weather weeks in advance by observing animal behavior, plant growth patterns, and atmospheric conditions. Now get ready for this revelation that'll change everything you know about agriculture. Medieval people practiced what we now call permaculture. They understood how different plants, animals, and environmental factors interacted to create sustainable agricultural systems. They knew which crops to plant together for mutual benefit, how to use animals to improve soil fertility, and how to work with natural water cycles rather than against them. Modern sustainable agriculture is essentially rediscovering medieval farming techniques that were abandoned during industrialization. Here's something amazing that modern agriculture is just rediscovering, and it's going to blow your mind. Medieval people practiced crop rotation and soil management techniques that actually improved soil fertility over time rather than depleting it. They understood that different plants took different nutrients from the soil, and that strategic rotation could restore and enhance soil health. But here's the incredible part. Some medieval farmland is still more fertile today than land that's been farmed with modern industrial methods for decades. The medieval three-field system was incredibly sophisticated, and here's why it was genius. One field for winter crops, one for spring crops, and one left fallow to restore fertility. But the fallow field wasn't idle. It was grazed by animals whose manure restored nutrients, and it grew wild plants that attracted beneficial insects and prevented soil erosion. This system was so effective that it sustained European agriculture for over 1,000 years without depleting the soil. Spring also meant the beginning of the building season, and here's where medieval engineering will absolutely amaze you. Medieval people would repair damage from winter storms, build new structures, and improve their homes and workshops. But this construction was done with incredibly sophisticated techniques that created buildings lasting hundreds of years. Some medieval buildings are still structurally sound today after surviving wars, earthquakes, and centuries of weather that have destroyed much newer construction. Medieval builders understood architecture, engineering, and material science at levels that rival modern construction. And this is going to shock you. They knew how to build foundations that wouldn't shift, how to create walls that would support enormous weights, and how to design roofs that would shed water and snow effectively for centuries. Many medieval cathedrals are still considered engineering marvels that modern architects struggle to understand and replicate. Summer meant long days of intense labor, but also abundance and warmth that medieval people maximized with incredible efficiency. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. This was when people would repair buildings, travel to distant markets, and engage in the social activities that winter made impossible. But summer work wasn't just about immediate needs. It was about preparing for the next winter with meticulous planning. They had to think ahead constantly, because a single mistake in summer preparation could mean death in winter. Now, prepare to be absolutely amazed by medieval food preservation technology. Medieval people were masters of food preservation who developed techniques for drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting foods that could keep them nutritious and safe for months or even years. These weren't simple methods. They were sophisticated food science based on centuries of accumulated knowledge about bacteria, chemistry, and nutrition. Some medieval preservation techniques were so effective that archaeologists still find perfectly preserved foods in medieval sites centuries later. But here's the incredible part that modern food scientists are studying. They understood how to control moisture, temperature, and air exposure to prevent spoilage while maintaining nutritional value. Some medieval preserved foods retained more vitamins and minerals than fresh foods that had been stored for weeks using modern methods. Summer was also travel season. And here's something that'll completely change your perspective. When merchants would make long journeys to distant markets, pilgrims would visit holy sites, and families would visit relatives in other communities. Medieval people traveled much more than most people realize, creating networks of communication and trade that connected communities across vast distances. They had a global economy centuries before globalization was supposed to exist. Medieval trade routes were incredibly sophisticated, and this is going to blow your mind, connecting Europe to Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Merchants would travel for months carrying goods that were in demand in distant markets, creating the first global economy. Some medieval trade networks were more extensive and efficient than trade systems that existed as recently as the 19th century. The harvest season was make or break time, but it was also when medieval communities showed their most impressive cooperation and organization. And here's where it gets absolutely incredible. Entire villages would work together to bring in crops before weather could destroy them. These harvest periods created intense social bonds as everyone's survival depended on collective effort. The level of coordination and teamwork would impress modern project managers and military strategists. Harvest was like a military campaign, and here's why this comparison is perfect. Everyone had specific roles, timing was critical, and failure could mean starvation. But medieval people approached harvest with remarkable efficiency and organization that ensured success even in difficult conditions. They had contingency plans for bad weather, backup storage systems, and community-wide insurance policies that guaranteed no family would starve if their individual harvest failed. Medieval people understood that individual success was impossible during harvest. And here's the revolutionary part. Community success was the only kind that mattered. This created remarkably strong social networks and mutual support systems that modern communities often lack. The harvest created bonds that lasted lifetimes and formed the foundation of medieval social security systems. Harvest time also involved complex economic calculations. And this is going to amaze you. About how much to sell, how much to store, how much to save for seed, and how much to trade for other necessities. Medieval people were sophisticated economists who understood market forces, supply and demand, and risk management. Some medieval economic strategies were more sophisticated than modern investment portfolios. Winter was survival mode, but it was also innovation time when medieval people showed their most impressive resourcefulness. And here's the part that'll blow your mind. Medieval people became incredibly efficient at conserving heat, rationing food, and maintaining their equipment during the long, dark months. They developed sophisticated techniques for making small amounts of fuel and food last through the entire season. Their resource management skills would put modern efficiency experts to shame. Medieval homes were designed specifically for winter survival, and here's the incredible engineering. They understood how to build structures that would retain heat, how to design fireplaces that would burn efficiently, and how to arrange living spaces to maximize warmth and minimize fuel consumption. Some medieval heating systems were more efficient than modern heating technology. But winter wasn't just about surviving, and here's where medieval culture gets fascinating. It was also about creating and innovating. This was when people would work on crafts, tell stories, and pass down knowledge to the next generation. Winter was medieval people's creative season, when they had time to focus on culture, art, and technology development. Many of the greatest medieval innovations were developed during the winter months when people had time to experiment and refine their ideas. Medieval winter crafts were incredibly sophisticated, and this will amaze you. People would spend months creating textiles, tools, furniture, and artwork that demonstrated remarkable skill and creativity. These winter projects weren't just busy work. They were essential economic activities that provided income and improved quality of life. Some medieval winter crafts produced goods that were more valuable per hour of labor than many modern manufacturing processes. Medieval people understood weather patterns in ways that we're only beginning to appreciate again through modern meteorology. And here's the incredible part. They could predict storms, seasonal changes, and weather patterns based on animal behavior, plant growth, and atmospheric conditions. They were human weather stations, reading signs that modern technology is just learning to recognize. Some medieval weather prediction methods were more accurate than early meteorological instruments. This weather knowledge was passed down through generations in the form of proverbs, sayings, and traditional observations that were remarkably accurate. And here's the mind-blowing part. Medieval weather lore often contained sophisticated understanding of atmospheric science expressed in memorable, practical forms. Modern meteorologists are studying medieval weather folklore to improve their own forecasting techniques. Medieval craftsmanship was incredibly sophisticated in ways that would shock modern people, and put many contemporary manufacturing processes to shame. What we often dismiss as primitive was actually the result of centuries of accumulated knowledge and technique refinement that created products of extraordinary quality and durability. Every tool had to be made by hand, maintained carefully, and used efficiently with a level of precision that modern mass production rarely achieves. A good set of tools was a craftsman's most valuable possession, often passed down through generations and constantly improved. These tools were so well made that many are still functional today, centuries later, while modern tools break after months of use. Medieval toolmaking was an art form that combined metallurgy, engineering, and ergonomics in ways that created incredibly effective instruments. A medieval hammer, knife, or chisel was perfectly balanced, designed for specific tasks, and built to last for decades of heavy use. Medieval people developed manufacturing techniques that we're still trying to understand and replicate today with all our modern technology. Some medieval steel was stronger than modern steel, created through techniques that combined different types of iron and carbon in ways that modern metallurgy is still studying. Medieval Damascus steel, for example, was made through techniques that created steel stronger and more flexible than most modern alloys. The exact methods were lost for centuries and are only now being rediscovered through scientific analysis of surviving blades. Medieval dyes created colors that lasted centuries without fading, using techniques that modern chemistry is trying to reverse engineer. Medieval purple, red, and blue dyes were so color-fast that textiles hundreds of years old still show vibrant colors today. Medieval building techniques created structures that are still standing today, while modern buildings fall down after decades. Medieval architects understood structural engineering, load distribution, and materials science at levels that rival modern construction engineering. Gothic cathedrals, for example, represent some of the most sophisticated engineering ever achieved. These buildings soar hundreds of feet into the air, support enormous weights, and have stood for almost 1,000 years through wars, earthquakes, and storms that have destroyed much newer buildings. The guild system provided quality control, training, and social support that was remarkably effective and way ahead of its time in terms of professional organization. Guilds weren't just about business. They were comprehensive social organizations that functioned like universities, insurance companies, and professional associations all rolled into one. Guild training was incredibly thorough and systematic. An apprentice would spend 7 years learning every aspect of their craft, from basic techniques to advanced skills, business practices, and ethical standards. By the time they became a master craftsman, they had received an education that was both broader and deeper than most modern professional training. Medieval apprenticeship was a sophisticated educational system that combined practical training with character development and social integration. Apprentices learned not just technical skills, but also business practices, social customs, and ethical standards. It was like getting a PhD in practical life skills while earning a living. The apprenticeship system created incredibly strong bonds between masters and students that lasted lifetimes. A master craftsman felt responsible for their apprentices' success and would continue to support them throughout their careers. Here's something that'll blow your mind. Medieval craftsmen were constantly innovating and improving their techniques, but they did it slowly and carefully through systematic experimentation. Medieval people improved techniques gradually, testing changes thoroughly before adopting them widely. This careful approach led to remarkably durable and efficient systems that lasted for centuries. Medieval innovation was based on understanding why techniques worked, not just how they worked. This deep understanding allowed craftsmen to adapt their methods to different situations and continue improving their products over generations. Medieval metalworkers developed alloys and techniques that modern science is still studying and trying to replicate. Some medieval swords were made with techniques that we can observe but can't quite duplicate even with modern technology. They understood metallurgy at a level that was part science, part art, and part accumulated wisdom. Medieval blacksmiths understood heat treatment, carbon content, and metal structure in ways that allowed them to create tools and weapons that were perfectly suited to their intended uses. A medieval sword wasn't just sharp, it was flexible enough not to break, hard enough to hold an edge, and balanced perfectly for its intended fighting style. Medieval builders constructed cathedrals and castles that are engineering marvels even by today's standards, using nothing but human power and simple machines. They did complex mathematical calculations in their heads, understood structural engineering principles, and created buildings that have survived wars, earthquakes, and centuries of weather. Medieval architects understood how to distribute weight, how to create stable foundations, how to design walls that could support enormous loads, and how to build structures that would remain standing for centuries. Many medieval buildings are still in use today for their original purposes. Medieval textile workers created fabrics that were more durable, beautiful, and complex than many modern textiles, using techniques that modern textile science is trying to understand. They developed dyeing techniques that created colors so vibrant and long-lasting that modern museums study them to understand how they were made. Medieval weavers could create fabrics with incredibly complex patterns, textures, and properties using only hand-operated looms. Their understanding of fiber properties, weaving techniques, and finishing processes created textiles that were both functional and beautiful. The medieval understanding of chemistry was actually quite advanced, even though they didn't call it chemistry or understand it in modern terms. Blacksmiths understood oxidation, reduction, and metallurgy. Dyers understood pH, chemical reactions, and color theory. Brewers understood fermentation, bacteria control, and food safety. Medieval alchemists, despite their reputation for pursuing impossible goals like turning lead into gold, actually developed many of the techniques and equipment that became the foundation of modern chemistry. They invented distillation, purification techniques, and laboratory equipment that are still used today. Medieval people were master recyclers who could turn almost any material into something useful with remarkable creativity and efficiency. They repurposed building materials, clothing, tools, and even food scraps in ways that modern environmentalists would admire. Nothing was ever wasted. Everything had potential for reuse or repurposing. This recycling wasn't just about saving money. It was about understanding the true value of materials and labor. Medieval people knew how much work went into creating anything, so they made sure to get maximum use from everything they made or acquired. As our medieval day progresses, and the afternoon sun begins its descent toward evening, we begin to understand something profound about how medieval people thought and processed their world. Their mental framework was completely different from ours, but it was incredibly sophisticated and effective for creating meaning, purpose, and psychological resilience in challenging circumstances. Medieval people had a fundamentally different relationship with knowledge and learning that was both more practical and more philosophical than our modern approach. They valued wisdom over information, understanding over facts, and experience over theory. They believed that true knowledge came through practice, contemplation, and spiritual insight, not just through reading or studying abstract concepts. This approach to knowledge created people who understood their world deeply rather than broadly. A medieval farmer might not know about distant countries, but they understood their local environment with incredible precision. They knew every plant, every weather pattern, every soil type, and every seasonal change in their area with a level of detail that would impress modern ecologists. Medieval farmers could predict weather changes days in advance by observing cloud formations, wind patterns, animal behavior, and plant responses. They knew which plants indicated good soil, which animals predicted storms, and which seasonal signs meant early or late winters. This knowledge was passed down through generations and constantly refined through observation and experience. The medieval understanding of local ecosystems was incredibly sophisticated. They knew which plants grew well together, which animals were beneficial for crop production, and how to manage land sustainably for long-term productivity. Their agricultural practices were based on centuries of accumulated ecological knowledge. Medieval people understood the interconnectedness of natural systems in ways that modern industrial agriculture is just beginning to rediscover. They knew that healthy soil depended on diverse plant communities, that pest control required beneficial insects, and that water management needed to work with natural drainage patterns. The medieval approach to problem solving was holistic and long-term in ways that put modern decision-making to shame. They thought in terms of generations, not quarters or even years. When they made decisions, they considered how those decisions would affect their children and grandchildren, not just their immediate situation. This long-term thinking created incredibly stable and sustainable communities that lasted for centuries. Medieval people built for permanence, planned for continuity, and made decisions based on their effects over generations. They understood that short-term gains that caused long-term problems were ultimately destructive. Medieval urban planning reflected this long-term thinking. Cities were designed with room for growth, with water systems that could serve expanding populations, and with building techniques that would last for centuries. Many medieval cities are still functional today because they were planned with permanence in mind. Medieval people had an incredibly rich inner life that was nurtured through practices we've largely abandoned in our modern rush toward external stimulation. They practiced meditation, contemplation, and spiritual exercises that modern people are rediscovering through mindfulness and wellness movements. Medieval prayer wasn't just religious obligation. It was psychological practice that helped people process emotions, find perspective on problems, and maintain mental balance. Medieval people understood that inner peace was essential for dealing with outer challenges and developed sophisticated techniques for achieving it. Medieval monasteries were centers of psychological and spiritual development that created remarkably balanced and peaceful individuals. Monastic practices included meditation, study, physical labor, and community service that created well-rounded people with deep inner resources. The monastic understanding of human psychology was incredibly sophisticated. They understood that mental health required balance between solitude and community, between physical and intellectual activity, between service to others and personal development. Here's something fascinating about the medieval mindset. Medieval people were much more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity than we are in our information-obsessed age. They understood that many questions don't have clear answers and that wisdom often means accepting mystery rather than demanding explanations for everything. This comfort with uncertainty created remarkable psychological resilience. Medieval people could face unknown challenges without being paralyzed by the need to understand everything in advance. They developed trust in their ability to adapt and respond to whatever situations arose. Medieval people understood that life was inherently unpredictable, and that the ability to adapt was more valuable than the ability to control. This understanding created people who were remarkably flexible and resilient in the face of change and challenge. Medieval education was based on memory and repetition, which might sound boring to us, but it created incredibly sharp minds with remarkable retention abilities. Medieval people could memorize vast amounts of information and had mental calculation abilities that would impress modern mathematicians. This emphasis on memory training created people who carried entire libraries of knowledge in their heads. A medieval scholar could recite thousands of lines of poetry, remember complex philosophical arguments, and perform mathematical calculations without any external aids. Medieval education also emphasized understanding rather than just memorization. Students were expected to comprehend the meaning and application of what they learned, not just repeat it. This created people who could apply their knowledge creatively to new situations. The medieval approach to learning was also highly collaborative. Students learned from teachers, but they also learned from each other through discussion, debate, and shared exploration of ideas. This collaborative approach created communities of learning that supported individual development. The medieval understanding of psychology was actually quite sophisticated in its own way. They understood that mental and physical health were connected, that community relationships affected individual well-being, and that spiritual practices could heal emotional wounds. Medieval people understood that isolation was psychologically dangerous and that human beings needed community connection to maintain mental health. Their social structures were designed to prevent isolation and ensure that everyone had support networks. Medieval communities had sophisticated systems for providing emotional and practical support to members who were struggling with difficulties. These support systems included family networks, guild associations, religious communities, and neighborhood groups that provided multiple layers of assistance. Medieval people also understood that meaningful work was essential for mental health, and that people needed to feel that their efforts contributed to something larger than themselves. Their economic systems were designed to ensure that everyone had a role that was valued by the community. Medieval people had a completely different relationship with death that was actually healthier than our modern approach of avoiding the topic. They accepted death as a natural part of life and spent time preparing for it spiritually and practically. This made them less anxious about mortality and more focused on what really mattered in life. This acceptance of mortality created people who were more present in their daily lives and more appreciative of simple pleasures. Because they knew life was uncertain, they paid attention to small joys and found meaning in ordinary activities. Medieval people also understood that death gave meaning to life, and that the temporary nature of existence made every moment more precious. This understanding created people who lived with intensity and purpose rather than taking life for granted. The medieval concept of time was cyclical rather than linear, which created a completely different psychological experience of life. They saw life as part of eternal patterns that repeated through seasons, generations, and spiritual cycles. This gave them a sense of being part of something larger than themselves. This cyclical understanding of time meant that failures and setbacks were seen as temporary parts of larger patterns rather than permanent defeats. Medieval people understood that everything changes and that patience and persistence were more valuable than speed and immediate success. Medieval agricultural cycles reinforced this understanding of cyclical time. Farmers knew that crop failures would be followed by good harvests, that difficult seasons would give way to abundant ones, and that patience and steady work would eventually yield results. Medieval people practiced gratitude as a daily discipline rather than an occasional feeling. They understood that appreciating what they had was more important than wanting what they didn't have. This created remarkable psychological resilience in the face of hardship and scarcity. This practice of gratitude wasn't just positive thinking. It was practical psychology that helped people maintain mental balance and find satisfaction in limited circumstances. Medieval people understood that happiness came from appreciation rather than acquisition. Medieval gratitude practices were often communal activities that reinforced social bonds while encouraging individual well-being. Harvest festivals, for example, were community-wide expressions of gratitude that celebrated abundance while acknowledging the hard work that created it. The medieval approach to work was fundamentally different from our modern, career-focused mentality. Work wasn't just about earning money or achieving success. It was about contributing to community welfare and fulfilling social responsibilities. This approach to work created deep satisfaction and purpose that many modern workers lack. Medieval people knew that their work mattered to their community and that their skills and efforts were essential for everyone's well-being. Medieval craft guilds reinforced this understanding of work as service by emphasizing quality, responsibility, and community contribution over individual profit. Guild members understood that their reputation and the reputation of their craft depended on everyone maintaining high standards. Medieval people understood that individual identity was inseparable from community identity. They didn't think of themselves as isolated individuals, but as parts of larger social organisms. This created strong social bonds and mutual support systems that provided security and meaning. This communal understanding of identity meant that personal achievements were shared with the community, and personal problems were community concerns. No one faced challenges completely alone, because everyone understood that individual welfare affected community welfare. Medieval communities had sophisticated systems for sharing both burdens and benefits. When someone faced hardship, the community provided support. When someone achieved success, the community celebrated and shared in the benefits. As our medieval day draws toward evening and the harsh necessities of survival begin to soften into something approaching leisure, the pace naturally slows, and we begin to see how medieval people created beauty, meaning, and cultural richness within their challenging circumstances. The approaching darkness brings its own rhythms and rituals that have provided comfort and continuity for countless generations. Evening was when the spiritual and cultural life of medieval communities truly flourished, when people had time to focus on activities that nourished the soul rather than just sustaining the body. Evening work was different from daytime labor, quieter, more contemplative, often done by firelight in the company of family and neighbors. This was when people mended clothes, told stories, shared knowledge, and maintained the social bonds that held communities together. Evening was when practical skills merged with cultural expression to create activities that were both useful and beautiful. The transition from daylight to firelight created a natural shift in consciousness that modern people rarely experience. Artificial lighting has eliminated this daily transformation from the bright, active world of day to the intimate, reflective world of night. Medieval people lived through this transition every day, and it shaped their psychology and culture in profound ways. Medieval people understood that different types of light created different moods and supported different activities. Bright daylight was for active work, dim firelight was for quiet contemplation, and darkness was for rest and dreams. This understanding influenced how they organized their daily activities and social interactions. The quality of firelight influenced medieval culture in profound ways that we can still observe in surviving art and literature. Firelight is warm, flickering, and intimate. It creates a sense of closeness and community that electric lighting can't match. Medieval people gathered around fires not just for warmth, but for the psychological comfort that shared light provided in the darkness. Medieval fireplaces were the center of home life in ways that modern heating systems can't replicate. The fireplace provided heat, light, cooking facilities, and a focal point for family activities. Everything important happened around the fire. Meals were prepared, stories were told, work was done, and family bonds were strengthened. The evening meal was often the most social time of day, when families would gather to share food, discuss the day's events, and plan for tomorrow. These conversations transmitted knowledge, values, and traditions from one generation to the next. Dinner wasn't just about nutrition, it was about culture, education, and community bonding. Medieval meals were carefully structured social events that reinforced family hierarchies and community values. Everyone had their place at the table, everyone knew the proper etiquette, and everyone participated in the social ritual that eating together represented. Meals were ceremonies that celebrated community and confirmed social relationships. Medieval table manners were incredibly sophisticated and served important social functions beyond just politeness. The way food was served, the order in which people ate, and the conversations that accompanied meals all communicated important information about social relationships and community values. Medieval people understood that sharing food was one of the most powerful ways to create and maintain social bonds. The act of eating together created trust, intimacy, and mutual obligation that strengthened families and communities. Medieval people created remarkable beauty in their daily lives despite harsh conditions and limited resources. Handmade objects were decorated with intricate patterns. Songs were composed and shared, and even simple activities were performed with attention to grace and skill. Beauty wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity for human dignity and psychological well-being. This creation of beauty in everyday objects reflected medieval understanding that human beings need aesthetic pleasure to maintain mental health. A beautifully carved wooden spoon, an intricately woven basket, or a carefully tended garden provided psychological nourishment that was as important as physical sustenance. Medieval decorative arts were incredibly sophisticated and demonstrated remarkable technical skill and artistic vision. Even simple household objects were often decorated with complex patterns that required years of training to master and hours of careful work to execute. Medieval people understood that beautiful objects had practical as well as aesthetic value. A beautifully made tool was likely to be well made functionally as well, and taking pride in the appearance of objects encouraged taking care of them and making them last longer. Evening prayers and meditation were natural parts of the daily routine that provided psychological and spiritual anchoring in a world of uncertainty. People would reflect on the day's events, express gratitude for having survived another day, and seek peace through spiritual practice. These evening prayers weren't just religious obligations. They were psychological practices that helped people process experiences, find meaning in difficulties, and maintain hope for the future. Medieval people understood that spiritual practice was essential for mental health and community cohesion. Medieval prayer practices were often communal activities that brought families and communities together in shared spiritual experience. These shared prayers created bonds that transcended individual differences and provided support during difficult times. The transition from work to rest was gradual and natural, following the rhythm of daylight rather than artificial schedules that ignore natural body rhythms. As the sun set, people would naturally slow down, finishing the day's essential tasks and preparing for the restorative hours of night. This natural transition from activity to rest created better sleep patterns and less stress than our modern habit of maintaining high activity levels until suddenly switching off. Medieval people understood that good rest required gradual preparation and developed evening routines that supported natural sleep cycles. Medieval storytelling was an advanced art form that served multiple purposes: entertainment, education, cultural preservation, and psychological healing. Stories weren't just fun. They were how communities remembered their history, taught moral lessons, maintained their identity, and helped people process difficult experiences. Medieval stories were living cultural documents that changed and evolved as they were told and retold. Each storyteller added their own interpretation and emphasis, creating narratives that remained relevant to contemporary concerns while preserving ancient wisdom. The oral tradition in medieval culture was incredibly sophisticated and served as the primary means of preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge. Professional storytellers were highly skilled performers who could adapt their narratives to different audiences and situations while maintaining the essential elements of traditional stories. Medieval audiences were active participants in storytelling rather than passive consumers. They would respond to stories with comments, questions, and their own related tales, creating interactive experiences that strengthened community bonds and encouraged creative expression. The bardic tradition in medieval culture was incredibly sophisticated, combining poetry, music, history, and psychology in performances that could last for hours or even days. These performances weren't just entertainment. They were cultural education that transmitted the entire knowledge base of the community. Medieval bards were highly trained professionals who memorized vast repertoires of stories, songs, and historical accounts. They served as living libraries who could provide entertainment, education, and cultural identity wherever they traveled. Medieval music was woven into every aspect of daily life in ways that our recorded music culture can't match. People sang while working, created songs for special occasions, and used music to mark important moments and transitions. Music wasn't separate from life. It was an integral part of living. Work songs in particular served multiple functions. They coordinated group activities, made repetitive tasks more bearable, and created social bonds among workers. The rhythm of the song would match the rhythm of the work, creating efficiency and community simultaneously. Medieval people understood that music had psychological and even physical effects that could help with everything from pain relief to mood regulation. They used specific songs for specific purposes: lullabies for sleep, work songs for energy, religious chants for meditation, and celebration songs for joy. Medieval musical instruments were often handmade by the musicians themselves, creating intimate relationships between performers and their tools. This personal connection to instruments influenced the development of individual musical styles and encouraged innovation within traditional forms. The evening hours were when medieval crafts flourished, when people had time to create objects of beauty and utility that went beyond bare survival needs. These evening craft sessions were often community activities where people would work together while socializing and sharing knowledge. Medieval crafts weren't just practical. They were artistic expressions that allowed people to create beauty and demonstrate skill. A beautifully carved wooden bowl or an intricately embroidered garment was a source of pride and a contribution to community culture. These craft sessions were also educational opportunities where knowledge and skills were passed from one generation to the next. Children would learn by watching and gradually participating, acquiring complex skills through observation and practice rather than formal instruction. Medieval people understood that learning happened best in social contexts where knowledge was demonstrated, practiced, and discussed rather than just described. Evening craft sessions created perfect learning environments that combined skill development with social bonding. Medieval crafts were often collaborative activities where different family members contributed different skills to create finished products. This collaboration created interdependence and mutual respect while producing objects that no individual could have made alone. The medieval approach to time during evening hours was task-oriented rather than clock-oriented, which created less stress and more satisfaction. People worked on projects until they were complete or until fatigue made them stop, rather than working according to arbitrary time schedules. This natural approach to time meant that people were more likely to enter flow states where they became completely absorbed in their activities. Medieval craftspeople regularly experienced the deep satisfaction that comes from total engagement with meaningful work. Medieval crafts were also forms of meditation that provided psychological benefits beyond the practical value of the finished products. The repetitive motions of spinning, weaving, carving, or sewing created calm, focused mental states that reduced stress and promoted well-being. Evening was also when medieval people engaged in games and recreational activities that strengthened social bonds and provided mental stimulation. These games weren't just time killers. They were sophisticated social activities that taught strategy, cooperation, and friendly competition. Medieval games ranged from simple children's activities to complex strategic games that required years to master. Chess, for example, was incredibly popular among medieval nobility and was seen as training for military and political strategy. Medieval children's games were designed to teach important life skills while providing entertainment. Games that involved running, jumping, and coordination prepared children for physical work, while games that required strategy and cooperation taught social skills. Medieval people understood that play was essential for human development and well-being at all ages. Adults engaged in games and recreational activities not just for entertainment, but for stress relief, social bonding, and mental stimulation. As night falls over our medieval world and the last light fades from the western sky, we begin to understand how people found peace and rest in conditions that seem impossibly difficult to modern minds. The medieval approach to sleep was both practical and spiritual, designed to restore both body and soul through natural rhythms that our electric age has largely forgotten. The preparation for sleep was ritualized and methodical, creating a transition from the active world of day to the restorative world of night. People would carefully bank their fires to provide warmth through the night, arrange their bedding for maximum comfort, and position themselves to share body heat efficiently. These weren't just practical considerations. They were acts of care for family and community that reinforced social bonds even during sleep. Medieval people understood that good sleep required both physical and mental preparation. They developed evening routines that helped them transition from the stresses and activities of the day to the peaceful state needed for restorative rest. These routines were passed down through families and refined over generations. The banking of fires was a sophisticated process that required skill and knowledge accumulated over centuries. The fire had to be arranged so that it would provide heat through the night without going out completely, but also without creating dangerous conditions or consuming too much fuel. This process was both science and art. Medieval fire management techniques were incredibly sophisticated and demonstrated deep understanding of combustion, heat transfer, and fuel efficiency. People knew exactly how to arrange different types of wood and other materials to create fires that would burn slowly and steadily for hours. Medieval heating systems were designed to maximize efficiency and safety while providing comfort through long, cold nights. They understood how to create thermal mass that would store heat during the day and release it slowly at night, creating stable temperatures with minimal fuel consumption. Medieval families slept together not just for warmth, but for security and comfort. That created psychological benefits we're only beginning to understand again through modern research on co-sleeping and family bonding. The sounds of familiar breathing provided reassurance in the darkness, and shared dreams created bonds that lasted lifetimes. The modern idea of everyone having their own bedroom would have seemed lonely and impractical to medieval people. This family sleeping arrangement created a sense of security and belonging that helped people rest peacefully despite external uncertainties. Children grew up feeling protected and connected, while adults shared the responsibility of watching over the family during vulnerable sleep hours. Medieval sleeping arrangements were carefully organized to provide both intimacy and practicality. Families developed systems for sharing space and warmth that maximized comfort while maintaining appropriate social boundaries and hierarchies. Medieval people understood that sleep was a vulnerable time when supernatural and natural dangers might threaten, so they developed protective rituals and arrangements that provided both practical and psychological security. Prayers, blessed objects, and careful positioning all contributed to peaceful rest. Medieval bedtime prayers were sophisticated psychological practices that helped people process the day's experiences and prepare mentally for sleep. These prayers weren't just religious obligations, but practical tools for achieving the mental state necessary for restorative rest. Medieval people understood that the mind needed to be quieted and prepared for sleep just as much as the body. They developed techniques for letting go of worries, processing emotions, and entering the receptive state that allows for deep, healing sleep. Prayer and meditation were natural parts of the bedtime routine that helped people find peace despite ongoing challenges. People would reflect on their actions, seek forgiveness for mistakes, and express gratitude for blessings received. This spiritual practice helped them sleep peacefully despite daily challenges. These bedtime spiritual practices created psychological closure for the day and helped people maintain perspective on their difficulties. By reflecting on both successes and failures in a spiritual context, medieval people found meaning and peace that supported restful sleep. Medieval people understood something profound about rest that we're beginning to rediscover through modern sleep science. That sleep is not just physical recovery, but also spiritual and emotional healing. They approached sleep as a sacred time when the soul could restore itself and prepare for another day of challenges. This understanding of sleep as healing time influenced how medieval people prepared for rest and how they structured their sleeping environments. Sleep wasn't just unconsciousness. It was an active process of restoration that required proper conditions and attitudes. Medieval sleep practices included techniques for encouraging healing dreams, processing emotional experiences, and receiving spiritual guidance through the unconscious mind. Sleep was seen as a time when the soul could connect with higher wisdom and divine guidance. The medieval bedroom wasn't just for sleeping. It was a multi-purpose space for privacy, intimacy, and spiritual practice that served needs that modern homes address through multiple separate rooms. People would use their sleeping time for prayer, meditation, and quiet conversation that strengthened relationships and built emotional resilience. Medieval beds were often the most valuable piece of furniture in a home, carefully constructed and maintained because they represented security, comfort, and status. A good bed was an investment that could last for generations and provide comfort for entire families. Medieval bed construction was incredibly sophisticated, using techniques that maximized comfort and durability with available materials. Beds were designed to provide support, warmth, and protection while being practical for daily use and easy to maintain. Medieval bedding was carefully chosen and maintained to provide maximum comfort and hygiene. People understood which materials provided the best insulation, which fabrics were most comfortable against the skin, and how to care for bedding to keep it clean and durable. Medieval people had sophisticated techniques for dealing with insomnia and sleep problems that modern sleep medicine is rediscovering. They used herbs, meditation, breathing exercises, and mental practices that promoted relaxation and natural sleep cycles. These natural sleep aids were based on centuries of observation and experimentation with what actually worked to promote healthy rest. Medieval herbalists understood which plants had sedative properties and how to use them safely and effectively. Medieval sleep herbs included lavender for relaxation, chamomile for calming, valerian for deep sleep, and many others that were used in teas, sachets, and aromatherapy preparations. These natural remedies were gentle but effective and didn't create the dependency problems associated with modern sleep medications. Medieval people understood that good sleep required proper temperature regulation, which they achieved through clothing, bedding, and sleeping arrangements that could be adjusted for seasonal conditions. They knew how to stay warm in winter and cool in summer using only natural materials. The medieval understanding of bedding and clothing for sleep was sophisticated and practical. They used layers that could be added or removed as needed, materials that breathed properly, and arrangements that maximized comfort with minimal resources. Medieval sleep clothing was designed specifically for comfort and temperature regulation. People understood which fabrics felt good against the skin, which materials provided insulation without overheating, and how to design garments that allowed for movement during sleep. Medieval people also understood the importance of air quality for good sleep and developed techniques for ensuring proper ventilation while maintaining warmth. They knew how to create sleeping environments that provided fresh air without drafts or excessive heat loss. In the deeper hours of night, as our medieval ancestors settle into profound sleep, we discover how they found peace that transcended their daily struggles. This wasn't the absence of hardship, but the presence of something more powerful than hardship. The human capacity for finding meaning and beauty in any circumstances, even in the realm of dreams and unconscious rest. The darkness that surrounded medieval communities was complete and natural, unmarked by artificial light that disrupts our modern sleep cycles. In this darkness, people could truly rest, letting go of the day's concerns and finding connection with rhythms larger than individual survival. This natural darkness was actually healthier for sleep than our artificially lit world. Medieval people experienced darkness in ways that modern people rarely do. Complete darkness triggered natural sleep hormones and allowed for deeper, more restorative rest. Their circadian rhythms were naturally regulated by the daily cycle of light and darkness without interference from artificial illumination. Medieval people understood that darkness was not empty or frightening, but full of potential and possibility. They saw darkness as a time of rest, renewal, and connection with the unconscious wisdom that emerges during sleep. Darkness was welcome rather than feared. Medieval dreams were different from ours, filled with practical concerns, but also with hopes, fears, and spiritual visions that provided guidance and comfort. People believed dreams carried important messages and paid careful attention to their meaning. Dreams were seen as communication from the divine, the unconscious, and the community of ancestors. This attention to dreams created rich inner lives that complemented and enhanced waking experience. Medieval people understood that dreams could provide solutions to problems, warnings about dangers, and insights into complex situations that weren't obvious during waking hours. Medieval dream interpretation was a sophisticated practice that combined psychology, spirituality, and practical wisdom. People understood that dreams used symbolic language that required careful interpretation, and they developed systems for understanding dream messages. The medieval approach to dreams recognized that the unconscious mind processed information and emotions in ways that could provide valuable guidance for waking life. Dreams weren't just random neural activity, but meaningful communications from deeper levels of consciousness. Medieval people kept dream journals and shared significant dreams with family members and spiritual advisors. They understood that dreams were personal but also communal experiences that could provide guidance for individuals and communities. Medieval dream sharing created opportunities for emotional support and practical advice. When someone had a troubling dream, the community would help interpret it and provide comfort. When someone had an inspiring dream, it might influence community decisions or individual choices. The night sounds of medieval life created their own form of music. The settling of wood, the distant sounds of animals, the gentle breathing of sleeping families. These sounds spoke of life continuing, of communities enduring, of hope persisting through difficulty. These natural night sounds created a sense of security and connection that helped people rest peacefully. The sounds of the natural world provided reassurance that life was continuing its eternal cycles, despite human struggles. Medieval people were attuned to night sounds in ways that modern people, surrounded by constant noise, cannot easily understand. They could distinguish between normal sounds and warning sounds, between the calls of different animals, and between the sounds of weather and the sounds of human activity. This attention to night sounds created a sense of connection with the natural world that provided both practical and psychological benefits. People felt embedded in larger natural systems rather than isolated from them. Medieval people understood that rest wasn't just about individual recovery, but about community restoration that benefited everyone. When people slept well, the whole community functioned better. They saw sleep as a gift not just to themselves, but to everyone around them. This understanding of sleep as a community benefit influenced how medieval people organized their sleeping arrangements and evening routines. Everyone's rest was seen as important for everyone's well-being, creating shared responsibility for creating conditions that supported good sleep. Medieval communities developed customs and practices that supported collective rest. These included quiet hours when loud activities were discouraged, shared responsibility for night watches, and community support for people who had trouble sleeping. The medieval practice of night prayers created a sense of connection with the divine and with communities of believers around the world. People knew that others were praying at the same time, creating a sense of spiritual solidarity that transcended physical isolation. These night prayers weren't just individual practices, but connections to larger spiritual communities that provided support and meaning beyond immediate circumstances. Medieval people understood that they were part of something larger than their local community. Medieval prayer practices often included prayers for the entire community, for travelers, for the sick, and for those in need. This practice of praying for others during the night created bonds of compassion and mutual support that strengthened communities. Medieval people developed remarkable abilities to rest peacefully despite physical discomfort that would prevent most modern people from sleeping. They learned to find comfort in simple pleasures: the warmth of shared blankets, the security of family presence, the satisfaction of having completed another day's work. This ability to rest despite discomfort came from understanding that comfort was relative, and that gratitude for small blessings could create peace even in difficult circumstances. Medieval people didn't expect perfect conditions for rest. They created the best conditions possible and found peace within them. Medieval people understood that physical comfort was less important for good sleep than mental and spiritual peace. They developed techniques for achieving inner tranquility that could overcome external discomforts and provide restorative rest even in challenging conditions. The medieval understanding of sleep cycles was actually quite sophisticated, even without modern scientific knowledge. They understood that sleep had different phases and that different types of rest served different purposes for physical and mental restoration. Medieval people naturally followed polyphasic sleep patterns that modern research is finding may be healthier than our standard 8-hour block. They understood that the body has natural rhythms that should be honored rather than forced into artificial schedules. Medieval sleep patterns included periods of light sleep, deep sleep, and quiet wakefulness that created more natural and restorative rest than our modern emphasis on continuous unconsciousness. They understood that sleep quality was more important than sleep quantity. Medieval people also understood that different seasons required different sleep patterns and adjusted their routines accordingly. They slept longer in winter and shorter in summer, following natural rhythms that supported their health and energy levels. As our journey through medieval life reaches its peaceful conclusion and the deepest hours of night embrace both our ancestors and ourselves, we begin to see how these remarkable people found meaning and beauty within constraints that would challenge us today. Their wisdom about living well with limited resources offers lessons that are surprisingly relevant to our modern world of abundance and complexity. Medieval people lived much closer to natural rhythms than we do in our artificially lit and climate-controlled environment. Their lives were governed by sunrise and sunset, by seasonal changes, by the phases of the moon and the cycles of weather. This connection to natural cycles provided a sense of participating in something eternal and meaningful, something larger than individual concerns or temporary difficulties. This connection to natural rhythms created psychological benefits that modern people are rediscovering through practices like forest bathing, seasonal eating, and circadian rhythm regulation. Medieval people naturally lived in harmony with cycles that we now have to deliberately seek out and consciously practice. Medieval agricultural practices were based on understanding and working with natural cycles rather than trying to control or override them. This approach created sustainable systems that maintained productivity while enhancing rather than depleting natural resources. Medieval people understood that human well-being depended on staying connected to natural rhythms, and that disconnection from these cycles created physical and psychological problems. They organized their lives to maintain this connection, even as they developed increasingly sophisticated technologies and social systems. The human heartbeat, unchanged across centuries, connected medieval people to all who came before and all who would come after. In quiet moments before sleep, this internal rhythm became a source of meditation and peace, a reminder that life continues regardless of external circumstances. This awareness of the heartbeat as a connection to universal human experience provided comfort and perspective that transcended immediate difficulties. Medieval people understood that they shared fundamental experiences with all humanity across time, and that their struggles and joys were part of eternal human patterns. Medieval people practiced listening to their heartbeat as a form of meditation that connected them to their own life force and to the shared experience of being alive. This practice provided grounding and perspective during difficult times. The rhythm of the heartbeat also influenced medieval music, poetry, and other cultural expressions. Many medieval art forms were based on rhythms that echoed the natural patterns of the human body and created resonance between artistic expression and physical experience. Medieval people understood something we often forget in our pursuit of material progress: that much of life's richness comes not from external comfort, but from human connections, from meaningful work, from spiritual growth, and from the simple satisfaction of meeting challenges with courage and grace. This understanding created people who could find satisfaction and meaning in circumstances that would frustrate modern people accustomed to immediate gratification and constant stimulation. Medieval people knew how to create meaning from within rather than seeking it from external sources. Medieval people understood that happiness and comfort were different things, and that true satisfaction came from living according to their values rather than from achieving particular external conditions. This understanding created remarkable resilience and contentment. Medieval people also understood that meaning came from contribution rather than consumption, and that the most satisfying life was one spent in service to something larger than oneself. This service-oriented approach to life created deep fulfillment and purpose. Their relationship with suffering was completely different from our modern approach of trying to eliminate all discomfort. They didn't see suffering as something to be eliminated at all costs, but as something that could lead to growth, wisdom, and spiritual development. This didn't mean they sought out suffering, but they found ways to extract meaning from unavoidable difficulties. This approach to suffering created remarkable resilience and psychological strength that allowed medieval people to endure hardships that would break people who hadn't developed such mental and spiritual resources. Medieval people understood that suffering was often the price of growth, and that avoiding all difficulty prevented development of strength and wisdom. They embraced challenges as opportunities for development rather than obstacles to happiness. Medieval spiritual traditions taught that suffering could be transformed into wisdom and compassion through proper understanding and spiritual practice. This transformation wasn't automatic, but required conscious effort and spiritual discipline. Medieval people practiced acceptance in ways that modern people are rediscovering through mindfulness and spiritual practices. They understood that fighting against unchangeable circumstances was wasteful, while adapting and finding opportunity within constraints was empowering. This practice of acceptance wasn't passive resignation, but active adaptation that allowed medieval people to thrive within limitations rather than being defeated by them. They understood the difference between what could be changed and what had to be accepted. Medieval acceptance practices included prayer, meditation, and philosophical reflection that helped people distinguish between circumstances they could influence and those they had to endure. This discrimination created more effective action and less psychological suffering. Medieval people also understood that acceptance was an ongoing practice rather than a one-time decision. They developed daily habits and spiritual disciplines that supported acceptance and helped them maintain peace even during difficult circumstances. The medieval understanding of community was based on mutual dependence and shared responsibility that created security and meaning beyond what individual achievement could provide. People knew they needed each other to survive, which created strong social bonds and effective support systems. Individual success was impossible. Community success was the only kind that mattered. This understanding of interdependence created societies that were more stable and supportive than our individualistic modern culture often manages to achieve. Medieval people understood that personal welfare and community welfare were inseparable, and that investing in community well-being was the best way to ensure individual security. Medieval communities developed sophisticated systems for sharing both resources and responsibilities that ensured everyone's basic needs were met while encouraging individual contribution and excellence. These systems balanced individual freedom with community welfare in ways that modern societies struggled to achieve. Medieval people understood that community bonds required constant maintenance and attention. They developed rituals, celebrations, and daily practices that reinforced social connections and ensured that everyone felt valued and included in community life. Their legacy lives in us, in our capacity for endurance, our ability to find joy in simple pleasures, our understanding that happiness and comfort are different things, and our knowledge that humans can adapt to almost any circumstances while remaining fundamentally human. These capacities that we inherited from our medieval ancestors are still within us, available when we need them for facing our own challenges and finding meaning in our own lives. The skills of resilience, adaptation, and community building that medieval people developed are still relevant for modern challenges. Medieval people developed psychological and spiritual resources that allowed them to thrive in difficult circumstances. These inner resources included faith, hope, gratitude, acceptance, and the ability to find meaning in suffering. These qualities remain valuable for anyone facing challenges today. The medieval approach to time as cyclical rather than linear offers comfort to modern people who feel pressured by constant progress and achievement. Medieval people knew that everything has its season, that difficulties pass, and that patience and persistence are more valuable than speed and efficiency. This cyclical understanding of time created people who could endure temporary hardships because they knew that everything changes and that current difficulties would eventually pass. They understood that life moves in cycles rather than straight lines. Medieval agricultural cycles taught people about patience, persistence, and the value of working with natural rhythms rather than against them. These lessons about timing and patience apply to many aspects of modern life where we expect immediate results. Medieval people understood that some things cannot be rushed, and that trying to force outcomes often creates more problems than solutions. They developed patience and persistence that allowed them to work steadily toward long-term goals without becoming discouraged by temporary setbacks. Their approach to work as service rather than self-advancement provides a different model for finding meaning in daily activities. Medieval people found purpose in contributing to something larger than themselves, whether family, community, or spiritual calling. This service-oriented approach to work created satisfaction and meaning that our modern career-focused culture often fails to provide. Medieval people understood that meaning comes from contribution rather than consumption, and that the most fulfilling work serves purposes beyond personal gain. Medieval craft guilds demonstrated how work could be both economically productive and personally fulfilling when it was embedded in community relationships and guided by values of quality, service, and mutual support. Medieval people understood that good work required not just technical skill, but also character, integrity, and commitment to serving others. They valued craftsmen who combined excellence with ethics and contribution to community welfare. The medieval understanding of wealth as relationships, skills, and spiritual development, rather than material accumulation, offers perspective on what truly creates security and satisfaction in life. This broader definition of wealth created people who could feel rich even with limited material possessions, because they understood that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought or sold. Medieval people invested in relationships, skills, and spiritual growth that provided lasting satisfaction. Medieval people understood that true security came from having strong relationships, useful skills, and inner resources, rather than from accumulating material possessions that could be lost or stolen. This understanding created a different relationship with money and possessions. Medieval communities supported this broader understanding of wealth by recognizing and rewarding excellence in relationships, skills, and character, rather than just material success. This created incentives for developing the kinds of wealth that truly mattered for individual and community well-being. As our medieval world settles into the profound stillness of deep night, we witness the sacred transition from waking consciousness to the restorative realm of sleep that our ancestors understood as a daily miracle. This transition was not simply the end of activity, but a conscious passage into a different state of being that offered healing, wisdom, and connection to the divine. Medieval people approached sleep as a spiritual practice that required preparation, intention, and reverence. They understood that the quality of their rest depended not just on physical comfort, but on the state of their soul as they entered sleep. This spiritual approach to rest created deeper, more restorative sleep than our modern approach of simply collapsing into unconsciousness. The evening prayers that preceded sleep were carefully crafted to release the day's concerns, seek forgiveness for mistakes, and place oneself under divine protection during the vulnerable hours of night. These prayers weren't just religious formalities, but psychological practices that prepared the mind for peaceful rest. Medieval bedtime prayers often included specific requests for protection from nightmares, evil influences, and physical dangers that might threaten during sleep. These prayers provided psychological comfort that helped people rest peacefully despite living in uncertain times. Medieval people understood that the transition to sleep required letting go of the day's worries and concerns. They developed mental practices for releasing anxiety, processing emotions, and entering the receptive state that allows for deep healing rest. The practice of mental review before sleep helped medieval people learn from their experiences and maintain perspective on their lives. By reflecting on the day's events in a spiritual context, they could find meaning in difficulties and gratitude for blessings. Medieval people believed that the soul was most active during sleep, traveling to other realms, receiving divine guidance, and processing experiences that couldn't be understood during waking hours. This understanding made sleep a sacred time that deserved respect and careful preparation. The medieval understanding of dreams as divine communication influenced how people prepared for sleep and how they structured their sleeping environments. Beds were often positioned to face east toward the rising sun, and sleeping spaces were blessed with prayers and holy objects. Medieval people understood that the quality of their dreams was influenced by their thoughts and spiritual state as they fell asleep. They developed practices for encouraging healing dreams and receiving spiritual guidance through the unconscious mind. The bedroom in medieval homes was often the most sacred space, used not just for sleep but for prayer, meditation, and intimate family moments. This sacred quality influenced how people approached rest and created environments that supported both physical and spiritual restoration. Medieval beds were often blessed by priests and contained relics or holy objects that provided spiritual protection during sleep. These practices reflected the understanding that sleep was a sacred time requiring divine protection. The medieval practice of sleeping in shifts created natural breaks in the night for prayer, reflection, and spiritual practice. The period between first and second sleep was considered especially sacred, a time when the veil between worlds was thin and divine communication was most likely. During these night watches, medieval people would often engage in contemplative prayer, read religious texts by candlelight, or simply sit in quiet meditation. These practices created rich inner lives and deep spiritual resources that sustained them through daily challenges. Medieval people understood that rest was not just individual restoration, but community healing. When families and communities rested well together, their bonds were strengthened, and their collective capacity for facing challenges was enhanced. The shared sleeping arrangements common in medieval homes created opportunities for emotional intimacy and mutual support that strengthened family relationships. Children grew up feeling secure and connected, while adults shared the responsibilities and comforts of family life. Medieval people developed sophisticated understanding of how different family members' sleep needs could be balanced and supported. They created sleeping arrangements that provided comfort and security for everyone, while maintaining appropriate boundaries and hierarchies. The medieval approach to children's sleep included practices for helping young ones feel safe and secure during the night. Lullabies, bedtime stories, and protective rituals helped children develop healthy sleep patterns and positive associations with rest. Medieval lullabies were often prayers or blessings set to music that provided both comfort and spiritual protection for sleeping children. These songs created bonds between parents and children while transmitting cultural values and spiritual beliefs. Medieval people understood that good sleep was essential for physical health, emotional stability, and spiritual growth. They developed practices and environments that supported all these aspects of human well-being through restorative rest. The medieval bedroom was designed to provide not just physical comfort, but psychological and spiritual sanctuary. Colors, textures, and arrangements were chosen to create peaceful, sacred spaces that supported deep rest and spiritual practice. Medieval people used natural materials and methods to create sleeping environments that were both comfortable and healthy. They understood how different materials affected sleep quality and chose bedding and furnishings that promoted restful sleep. As sleep finally claims our medieval ancestors in the deepest hours of the night, we're left with a profound appreciation for human resilience and the timeless nature of the human spirit. The medieval approach to life offers wisdom that transcends historical periods and speaks to universal human needs that remain constant despite changing circumstances. The medieval night deepens into perfect stillness, carrying within its darkness both the memory of daily struggles and the promise of renewal that comes with each new day. In this final rest, all is peaceful. All is exactly as it should be in the eternal rhythm of human life that connects us across centuries and makes us part of something larger than ourselves. Their quiet breathing continues through the night, a gentle reminder that life persists, that hope endures, that the capacity for peace exists even within challenging circumstances. And in that breathing, we find perhaps the most important lesson of all, that being human is not about the conditions we face, but about how we face them with dignity, courage, and grace. Medieval people teach us that dignity doesn't depend on external circumstances, but on internal character and the choices we make about how to respond to whatever life brings us. They show us that community bonds can provide security that material wealth cannot match, and that shared struggles can create deeper connections than shared luxuries. They demonstrate that simple pleasures can bring profound satisfaction when approached with gratitude and mindfulness, rather than being taken for granted or dismissed as insufficient. Medieval people knew how to find joy in small things because they understood that small things, accumulated over time, create the texture and meaning of life. Medieval celebrations of simple pleasures included seasonal festivals that marked the changing of the year, harvest celebrations that honored the fruits of labor, and family gatherings that strengthened bonds between generations. These celebrations created joy and meaning from ordinary experiences. Medieval people understood that happiness was not a constant state, but a series of moments that could be recognized, appreciated, and remembered. They developed practices for noticing and savoring good experiences that created lasting satisfaction and positive memories. The medieval understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear offers comfort to modern people who feel pressured by constant progress and achievement. Medieval people knew that everything has its season, that difficulties pass, and that patience and persistence are more valuable than speed and efficiency. This cyclical view of time created people who could endure present hardships because they trusted in the natural rhythms of change and renewal that govern all life. They understood that current conditions, whether good or bad, were temporary parts of larger patterns. Medieval people found comfort in the knowledge that they were part of eternal cycles that connected them to their ancestors and descendants. This sense of connection across time provided meaning and perspective that transcended immediate difficulties. The medieval understanding of death as transition rather than ending influenced how they lived and how they approached daily challenges. Knowing that life was temporary made every moment more precious and encouraged them to focus on what truly mattered. Their approach to work as service, rather than self-advancement, provides a different model for finding meaning in daily activities that modern people are rediscovering through purpose-driven careers and volunteer work. Medieval people found purpose in contributing to something larger than themselves, whether family, community, or spiritual calling. This service-oriented approach created deep satisfaction that came from knowing that their efforts mattered to others and contributed to the continuation of life and culture. They understood that individual meaning comes from collective contribution. Medieval people understood that the most satisfying work was that which served the common good and used their unique talents and abilities. They found ways to contribute their best efforts to community welfare while developing their own skills and abilities. The medieval approach to learning as wisdom-seeking rather than information-gathering offers guidance for our information-saturated age. Medieval people valued understanding over knowledge and wisdom over cleverness, focusing on what would help them live better rather than just know more. This wisdom-focused approach to learning created people who could apply what they knew to improve their lives and the lives of others, rather than just accumulating facts that had no practical application. Medieval education emphasized character development alongside skill development, creating people who were not just competent, but also ethical and committed to using their abilities for good purposes. Medieval people understood that true education never ended, but continued throughout life as they gained experience, faced new challenges, and deepened their understanding of themselves and their world. As our medieval world settles into eternal rest, we understand that these people who lived so differently from us were addressing the same fundamental human needs that we face today: the need for security, meaning, community, purpose, and peace. Their solutions were different from ours because their circumstances were different, but their underlying wisdom about what makes life worth living remains relevant and valuable for anyone seeking to create a meaningful existence. Medieval people show us that it's possible to live with dignity, find joy, create beauty, and maintain hope even in the most challenging circumstances. Their example reminds us that human beings have remarkable capacity for adaptation, resilience, and growth. The medieval legacy includes not just the buildings, art, and institutions they created, but also the example they set of how to live fully human lives within whatever constraints and opportunities we encounter. Sleep well, knowing that your ancestors earned this rest through their wisdom, that your modern comforts were built on their understanding of what truly matters, and that their quiet heroism in facing daily challenges with grace and dignity made possible the world you wake to each morning. In their rest, we find our own rest. In their peace, we discover our own capacity for contentment. In their resilience, we remember our own strength. And in their humanity, we recognize the eternal elements of human nature that connect us across time and circumstance. And so, the medieval world settles into eternal rest, carrying within its peaceful darkness both the memory of human struggle and the promise of human resilience, both the weight of limitation and the lightness of acceptance, both the challenges of mortality and the triumph of meaning over circumstance. In this final stillness, all is well. All is exactly as it should be in the timeless rhythm of human life that connects us all, that makes every struggle worthwhile, and that promises that peace is always possible for those who understand that true security comes not from external conditions, but from the eternal human capacity to find meaning, create beauty, and offer love even in the most challenging circumstances. The medieval night embraces all our ancestors with perfect peace, and in that peace, we find our own. Their dreams become our dreams, their wisdom becomes our wisdom, and their rest becomes our rest, as we all participate in the eternal human story of survival, growth, love, and transcendence. In the deepest silence of the medieval night, we hear the whisper of eternity reminding us that every life matters, every struggle has meaning, and every moment of peace is a gift to be treasured. Sleep well, dear ancestors, sleep well, and know that your legacy lives on in every act of courage, every moment of kindness, and every choice to create beauty in a world that sometimes seems bent on destroying it. The medieval world sleeps, and in its sleep, it dreams of us, its descendants who inherited not just its achievements but its possibilities, not just its solutions but its questions, not just its peace, but its ongoing invitation to live fully, love deeply, and find meaning in the magnificent, challenging, beautiful mystery of being human. Hey everyone, tonight we're not exploring epic battles or royal banquets, but something far more intimate. The shocking world of medieval daily life that would make your modern problems seem like luxury. Now dim those lights, get comfortable, and prepare to discover why your ancestors survived on less than you waste, thrived in communities stronger than any social network, and found happiness in ways we've completely forgotten. Privacy, said absolutely no one in medieval Europe. Let's begin with a surprising fact. You shared a single room with parents, grandparents, siblings, and farm animals. Your bed was a straw sack compressed harder than concrete. You woke to complete darkness and church bells. Everyone, including children, drank beer for breakfast because it was safer than water. And your entire future was decided the moment you were born. But here's what's truly shocking. Despite all this, medieval people had something we've lost: unshakable certainty about their place in the world, communities that actually supported each other, and work that gave their lives genuine meaning. Medieval people slept in 2 phases every night. First sleep from sunset until midnight, then they'd wake up for an hour or two for something called the watching, then second sleep until dawn. Modern sleep scientists think this might be more natural than our 8-hour blocks. During the watching, people would pray, do light work, visit neighbors, or have intimate conversations with their spouses. This wasn't insomnia. It was the most precious time of day. Quiet, peaceful, free from survival demands. Your morning routine was systematic, but alien to us. You'd wash with cold water scented with herbs that actually had antibacterial properties. You'd change your linen undergarments. Yes, they changed them more than you think. And apply sophisticated deodorants made from sage and mint that worked better than some modern products. Your clothes revealed everything about your social status. Wearing the wrong fabric or color was literally illegal and could result in death. A single high-quality garment cost as much as a modern car. Some clothing was so valuable it was passed down in wills like real estate. Women controlled household economies worth more than small businesses today, making life or death decisions about food storage, medicine, and trade routes, while officially having no power. Some medieval women were more economically powerful than modern CEOs, but they exercised it all from the domestic sphere. The guild system provided better job security than most modern corporations. If you got sick, they'd support you. If you died, they'd care for your family. If you needed training, they'd provide it. It was like having a professional family that lasted your entire career. Medieval people worked only 150 days per year, but spent the other 215 days preparing for winter, mastering survival skills, and maintaining community bonds so strong that medieval villages had lower rates of depression and suicide than our modern cities. They understood something about community mental health that we've completely forgotten. Every person, from the lowest serf to the highest noble, knew their work mattered, their community needed them, and their life had meaning beyond personal desires. Tonight, we're going to live through a complete medieval day, from that first moment of waking in total darkness to the final peaceful rest surrounded by family. You'll discover sophisticated systems for everything from weather prediction to food preservation, from education to healthcare, from conflict resolution to finding happiness. But most importantly, you'll understand why people who lived in wooden huts and faced constant threats from disease, war, and famine were psychologically healthier than we are in our comfortable, technologically advanced world. This journey will change how you see community, work, family, and what really matters in life. So settle in, because we're about to discover that our ancestors weren't primitive. They were masters of human society in ways we're only beginning to understand. Let's begin exactly where medieval people began every day, waking up in conditions that would terrify most modern people. Your bed isn't the comfortable mattress you know. It's a straw-stuffed sack that's been used for months, maybe years. The straw inside is compressed into something harder than your kitchen floor. But here's what's fascinating. Medieval people actually understood sleep better than we do. They practiced biphasic sleep. First sleep from sunset until around midnight, then the watching period for 1 to 2 hours, then second sleep until dawn. This wasn't a sleep disorder. It was completely normal and expected. But here's where it gets interesting. During the watching, people didn't just lie there. They'd pray, do quiet work like mending clothes, visit neighbors, or have deep conversations with their spouses. Some of the most important business of medieval communities happened during these midnight hours. You wake in total darkness most of the year. No light switches, no gradual sunrise alarm clocks, no soft LED displays. Just the sound of church bells echoing through the village, telling you it's time to start another day of survival challenges. These church bells weren't just timekeepers. They were the entire communication system for the community. Different bell patterns meant different things. Time to wake up, time for morning prayers, time for work, time for meals, time for evening prayers, time for sleep. The bell system was incredibly sophisticated. People could tell time to within minutes, distinguish between dozens of different messages, and even receive news from neighboring villages through bell patterns. It was like having a medieval internet made of bronze and powered by gravity. Now, here's where your morning routine gets interesting, and completely different from anything you know. You'd start by washing your hands and face with cold water from a basin. This wasn't optional. It was considered absolutely essential for both physical health and spiritual purity. The water might be scented with herbs like lavender, rosemary, or mint. But these weren't just pleasant scents. These herbs had actual antibacterial properties. Medieval people figured out natural antimicrobial chemistry centuries before we understood how it worked. Medieval people changed their undergarments more regularly than most people think. They understood that clean linen next to the skin was crucial for preventing disease. The wealthy might change their linen shirt daily, while even poor people tried to wash theirs weekly. They knew something we've forgotten, that the layer closest to your body was the most important for preventing illness. This understanding came from centuries of careful observation, not germ theory. They had sophisticated layering systems, multiple layers of clothing not just for warmth but for hygiene. The innermost layer of linen could be washed regularly, while the outer layers of wool or leather could be aired out and spot cleaned as needed. Medieval people had their own version of deodorant and perfume that actually worked. They'd use powdered herbs, especially sage and mint, rubbed under their arms and in their hair. Wealthy people had access to imported spices and perfumes that were incredibly expensive, but considered essential for social interaction. These weren't random pleasant scents. Sage is a natural antimicrobial agent. Mint has cooling properties that reduce sweating. Some of these medieval perfume recipes were so effective that modern cosmetic companies are still trying to reverse engineer them. These perfumes could last for days without reapplication. Now, let's talk about breakfast, and prepare to have your assumptions completely overturned. The morning meal was carefully planned for maximum nutrition and safety. Ale, or weak beer, was the standard drink. Not because people wanted to be drunk all the time, but because it was genuinely safer than water. This morning beer wasn't like modern beer. It was much lower in alcohol content, more like a nutritious, mildly fermented beverage. Even children drank it, because clean water was often impossible to guarantee. The brewing process killed harmful bacteria while providing essential nutrients. Modern nutritionists are discovering it was actually a sophisticated probiotic drink that supported digestive health and boosted immune function. Bread was the foundation of every meal, but it wasn't the soft white bread we know. Medieval bread was dense, dark, and incredibly nutritious. Different social classes ate different types of bread. Here's the irony that'll surprise you. The lower class bread was often more nutritionally complete, made from whatever grains were available. Wheat for the wealthy, rye, barley, oats, or even ground acorns for the poor. These coarser breads were actually healthier, containing more fiber, minerals, and vitamins than refined white bread. Some medieval bread recipes contained up to 12 different grains and seeds, creating nutritional profiles that modern whole grain breads can barely match. Medieval people figured out how to prevent virtually every vitamin deficiency using only locally available ingredients. They had solutions for scurvy, rickets, anemia, and other nutritional diseases centuries before vitamins were discovered. But now comes the most revealing part of the medieval morning, getting dressed. And this is where the true nature of medieval society becomes crystal clear. Getting dressed was a complex process that revealed your social status immediately and had to be done in a specific order for both practical and social reasons. Every piece of clothing had meaning. The cut, color, fabric, and accessories all communicated information about your wealth, occupation, and social position. You couldn't fake it. Everyone could tell exactly where you stood in society just by looking at you. But here's the terrifying part. Wearing clothing above your social station was literally illegal. There were actual laws called sumptuary laws that dictated exactly what each social class was allowed to wear. The penalties for wearing the wrong color or fabric could be more severe than the penalties for assault or theft. Medieval clothing was incredibly durable and designed to last for years or even decades. A single garment might be worn by multiple generations, altered and repaired countless times. A single high-quality medieval garment could cost the equivalent of a modern car. Some medieval clothing was so valuable that it was passed down in wills like real estate and could be used as collateral for loans. Finally, let's address the biggest myth about medieval hygiene, the idea that they were dirty and never bathed. Medieval people actually had sophisticated bathing practices, but they did them strategically rather than habitually. Full-body baths were reserved for special occasions like weddings, holy days, or before important social events, but partial washing was daily. They understood that excessive bathing could be harmful, especially in winter, so they developed efficient cleaning methods that conserved heat and water while still maintaining health. Their approach was based on the medical understanding of their time, that the body had natural balances that shouldn't be disrupted too frequently. And here's the shocking part. Modern science is confirming they were partially right. Overwashing can strip away beneficial bacteria and natural oils that protect the skin. Some medieval hygiene practices were more in tune with our natural biology than our modern obsession with constant cleanliness. Now that we understand how medieval people started their day, let's dive into the social system that governed every aspect of their lives. A system so sophisticated it might make you question everything about our modern society. Your straw mattress has been used for months. The straw compressed into something harder than your kitchen floor. But medieval people understood sleep differently than we do. They practiced biphasic sleep. First sleep from sunset until around midnight, then the watching period for 1 to 2 hours, then second sleep until dawn. This wasn't insomnia, it was normal. During the watching, people would pray, do quiet work like mending, visit neighbors, or have conversations with spouses. This was considered the most precious time, peaceful, free from survival demands. You wake in total darkness, no gradual light, no alarm clock, just church bells echoing through the village. These bells were the entire communication system, different patterns for wake-up, prayers, work, meals, sleep. The bell system was sophisticated. People could tell time to within minutes, distinguish dozens of different messages, even receive news from neighboring villages through bell patterns. Like a bronze internet powered by gravity, your morning routine was systematic. No shower, but a careful approach to cleanliness that might have been more thorough than modern routines. You'd wash hands and face with cold water from a basin, essential for health and spiritual purity. The water was often scented with lavender, rosemary, or mint, herbs with actual antibacterial properties. Medieval people understood that clean linen next to skin prevented disease. Wealthy people changed linen shirts daily. Even poor people washed theirs weekly. They knew the layer closest to your body mattered most. They had layering systems, multiple clothing layers not just for warmth, but hygiene. Inner linen washed regularly, outer wool or leather aired and spot cleaned. Medieval deodorant actually worked. Powdered herbs, especially sage and mint, rubbed under arms and in hair. Sage is a natural antimicrobial. Mint has cooling properties that reduce sweating. Wealthy people had expensive imported spices for perfume. These weren't just pleasant scents, they were effective antiperspirants that could last days without reapplication. The morning meal was carefully planned. Ale or weak beer was standard, much safer than water. The brewing process killed bacteria while providing nutrients. This beer was low alcohol, more like a fermented health drink. Children drank it because clean water was impossible to guarantee. Modern nutritionists are discovering it was actually a sophisticated probiotic. Bread was dense, dark, incredibly nutritious. Different classes ate different breads, white for wealthy, coarser for workers. Ironically, working class bread was more nutritionally complete. Made from available grains, wheat for wealthy, rye, barley, oats, ground acorns for poor. These coarser breads had more fiber, minerals, vitamins than refined white bread. Some medieval bread contained 12 different grains and seeds, creating nutritional profiles modern whole grain breads barely match. Medieval people maximized nutrition from limited resources. They knew which food combinations provided complete proteins, how to preserve vitamins through fermentation, which herbs supplemented essential nutrients. They figured out how to prevent virtually every vitamin deficiency using only local ingredients. Solutions for scurvy, rickets, anemia, centuries before vitamins were discovered. Getting dressed revealed your social status immediately. Every piece of clothing communicated wealth, occupation, position. You couldn't fake it. Wearing clothing above your station was illegal. Sumptuary laws dictated exactly what each class could wear. Wrong color or fabric could be punished more severely than assault. Medieval clothing was incredibly durable, lasting years or decades. Single garments worn by multiple generations, constantly altered and repaired. High-quality garments cost as much as modern cars. Some clothing was so valuable it was passed down in wills like real estate, used as collateral for loans. Medieval bathing was strategic, not habitual. Full baths for special occasions. Weddings, holy days, social events, daily partial washing. They understood excessive bathing could be harmful, especially in winter. They developed efficient cleaning methods that conserved heat and water while maintaining health. Based on medical understanding that the body had natural balances that shouldn't be disrupted too frequently, they believed too much washing weakened natural defenses. Modern science confirms they were partially right. Overwashing strips beneficial bacteria and natural oils that protect skin. Medieval society had intricate rules governing every interaction, creating one of the most stable social systems in human history. These rules provided tremendous security and predictability when survival was never guaranteed. Everyone knew exactly where they stood in society, your role, responsibilities, what to expect from life. Genuine honor in fulfilling your position well, farmer, craftsman, or noble. Social mobility was rare, but social respect was available to anyone who excelled. Medieval honor was different from modern understanding, not about individual achievement, but serving your community effectively, maintaining your reputation for reliability and skill. A good farmer was more esteemed than a poor knight. Community contribution mattered more than personal glory or wealth. This created remarkably cooperative societies where people helped each other because their own survival depended on everyone else's well-being. Medieval communities had lower rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide than modern societies, despite harsher conditions. They had built-in purpose and meaning that our individualistic culture destroyed. Family structures were sophisticated social and economic organizations. Multiple generations lived together for practical reasons that created efficient household systems. Grandparents provided childcare and wisdom, parents labor and leadership, children age-appropriate work. Extended family systems were like small corporations where everyone had specific responsibilities contributing to common good. Children learned by watching, gradually taking on more responsibility. Medieval children weren't miniature adults. They had their own culture, games, social structures designed for developmental needs. Medieval people understood child development, created age-appropriate activities and responsibilities. Children learned through play designed to teach survival skills and social cooperation, more effective than modern classroom education at teaching practical skills. Medieval toys were miniature adult tools, toy swords, dolls with wardrobes, farming implements, small looms. Sophisticated educational tools preparing children for adult responsibilities while allowing them to be children. Medieval time was task-oriented, not clock-oriented. Work organized around daylight, seasons, weather patterns. More flexible and sustainable than modern schedules. You worked until tasks were complete. Cows milked, fields plowed, bread baked. This approach created more satisfaction, less stress than clock-watching culture. Community celebrations provided joy and social bonding beyond daily survival. Harvest festivals, religious holidays, weddings gave people something to look forward to during difficult times. These celebrations were also economic events where debts were settled, marriages arranged, business deals made, news shared. Single festivals served as banks, dating services, news networks, entertainment centers. Medieval education was broader and more practical than modern systems. While formal literacy was limited, people learned through apprenticeships, storytelling, hands-on experience creating incredibly knowledgeable individuals. Master craftsmen might not read, but their knowledge was encyclopedic, including chemistry, physics, engineering principles. Education based on immediately useful, applicable knowledge rather than abstract learning. Medieval people were incredibly resourceful. Everything had to last as long as possible. Nothing was wasted. Worn clothing became rags, bandages, pillow stuffing. Ultimate sustainable lifestyle from necessity. Broken pottery became garden drainage. Worn shoes became leather patches. Old rope became boat caulking. Medieval people saw 5 different uses for any object. Medieval work was seasonal and task-oriented. During planting and harvest, everyone worked incredibly hard. During winter, less work meant time for crafts, socializing, cultural activities. Natural rhythm with built-in rest periods. Medieval women had more power than portrayed, expressed differently than modern rights. Many ran businesses, owned property, held political influence behind scenes. Female merchants, craftswomen, warriors were more common than realized. Women managed household economies, the foundation of the entire social system. Controlled budgets, managed workers, planned for seasonal needs, made decisions affecting extended families, sometimes entire communities. The guild system was like effective professional organizations, provided quality control, training, social support, career advancement, comprehensive social organizations caring for members' families, providing education, maintaining standards, offering insurance and retirement. Guild membership was like professional family lasting your entire career. Disabled? Guild supported you. Died? Guild cared for widow and children. Needed training? Guild provided it. Needed work? Guild helped find it. Guilds maintained high-quality standards ensuring customers got value. Products came with guarantees enforced by entire organization. Shoddy work meant discipline from peers, possible loss of membership. All right, hold on to your seats because what I'm about to tell you will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about medieval society, and I mean everything. When you finish hearing this, you're going to question every single movie, every book, every documentary you've ever seen about the Middle Ages. Because here's the truth that historians have been hiding from you. Medieval society wasn't a brutal, chaotic mess of ignorant peasants ruled by tyrannical lords. It was actually one of the most sophisticated, stable, and psychologically healthy social systems ever created by human beings. And the proof is so overwhelming that it's going to make you angry that no one ever told you this before. Medieval society was incredibly complex, with intricate rules governing every single interaction. But these rules actually created one of the most stable social systems in human history. Here's what's fascinating and completely different from what movies show you, and this is going to blow your mind so hard you might need to pause the video. These rules actually provided tremendous security and predictability in a world where survival was never guaranteed. But it gets even more incredible than that. These weren't arbitrary rules created by power-hungry nobles to oppress the masses. These were carefully evolved social contracts that had been tested and refined over centuries to create maximum stability and happiness for everyone involved. Think about this for a moment. We live in a world where we change jobs every few years, move cities constantly, and struggle with identity crises about who we are and what our purpose is. Medieval people never had these problems because their entire social system was designed to give everyone a clear identity, purpose, and place in the world from birth to death. Everyone knew exactly where they stood in society, which sounds restrictive to us, but actually provided enormous psychological comfort and security. You knew your role, your responsibilities, and what you could expect from life. But here's the part that's going to completely revolutionize how you think about freedom. This wasn't oppression. It was liberation from the anxiety and confusion that plagues modern life. There was genuine honor in fulfilling your position well, whether you were a farmer, craftsman, or noble. Social mobility was rare, but social respect was available to anyone who excelled at their role. And here's the mind-blowing part that modern psychologists are just discovering. People who have clear roles and expectations are significantly happier and more mentally stable than people who have unlimited choices but no clear direction. Medieval people had something we've completely lost. They had certainty about their place in the world, and that certainty gave them a psychological foundation that made them incredibly resilient in the face of hardship. But here's where it gets absolutely incredible and will leave you speechless, because this next part is going to completely destroy everything you think you know about medieval values. The medieval concept of honor was completely different from our modern understanding, and actually much more sophisticated than anything we have today. It wasn't about individual achievement or personal success, but about serving your community effectively and maintaining your reputation for reliability and skill. A good farmer who fed his village was held in higher esteem than a poor knight who failed in his duties. And here's the mind-blowing part that will change your entire perspective on success. Community contribution mattered more than personal glory or wealth. This completely destroys the Hollywood image of medieval times, doesn't it? We've been taught that medieval society was all about personal power and individual dominance, but the reality was the exact opposite. Success was measured by how much you contributed to your community's well-being, not by how much wealth or power you accumulated for yourself. And here's the absolutely revolutionary part that's going to make you question everything about modern society. This value system created people who were fundamentally happier and more fulfilled than we are today. Medieval people didn't suffer from the epidemic of depression, anxiety, and suicide that plagues our modern world. And now we know why. They had built-in purpose and meaning that our individualistic culture has completely destroyed. Every single person, from the lowest serf to the highest noble, knew that their work mattered, that their community needed them, and that their life had meaning beyond their own personal desires. Can you imagine living with that kind of certainty and purpose? Modern self-help books are desperately trying to recreate what medieval people had naturally built into their entire social system. Now get ready for this revelation that's going to change everything you think you know about medieval cooperation, because this is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. Medieval people understood that individual success was impossible without community success. This created remarkably cooperative societies where people genuinely helped each other because they knew their own survival depended on everyone else's well-being. It wasn't altruism. It was enlightened self-interest that created strong social bonds. But here's the absolutely incredible part that modern sociologists are just discovering. These medieval communities had lower rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide than our modern societies, despite living in much harsher conditions. The reason? They had built-in purpose and meaning that our individualistic culture has completely destroyed.